Welcome everybody to this afternoon's Pearcey Conversation. I'm your host, I'm Jordan Green. I'm the Chairman of Pearcey Victoria and Secretary of the National Committee. And I'm here today to share with you the panel that we have. I'd like to start by expressing that the Pearcey Foundation acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present and emerging. I recognise the Boonwurrung and Waiwurrung or Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation and all of the traditional custodians who belong to the lands where the Pearcey team and you, our guests, are based. The stories, traditions and living cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in this country are a valuable resource, as are those of all who have come to make Australia their home. Together, we are Australia. Before we move on to today's topic, I just want to remind you about some upcoming events. Next month, the Pearcey Conversation on the 26th of August at 4 p.m. in the afternoon will be on the topic of tertiary computer science, preparing future leaders. And our contributors will include Alan Noble, the founder of OzOcean, and we'll announce the other speakers shortly. We also have the 2020 Pearcey Foundation Entrepreneur of the Year Awards. These are run in each state and nominations are open right now. So if you know somebody in your state who's worked in the ICT sector, somebody who has taken a risk, made a difference and is an inspiration, please do nominate them for an award in your state. The finalists and the winners will be announced in each state, starting in Victoria in September, when the winner will be announced at the annual Pearcey Oration held on September the 2nd. The Pearcey Foundation is also working with the Tech Girls movement, and in October, we'll be celebrating women's contribution to Australia's computing industry as part of Ava Lovelace Day, Tuesday the 13th of October. Okay, so today we're going to have a discussion about the topic of resilience through the lens of ICT. First up, we've got John Blackburn. John served for 33 years in the RAAF, culminating in 2 years as our Deputy Chief of the Air Force. John retired with the rank of Air Vice Marshal and is an Officer of the Order of Australia. In the last 20 years, he's held a number of governance positions within and outside the defence community. Today, John is with us in his capacity as Chairman of the Institute for Integrated Economic Research Australia, and the significant work the Institute is leading to develop policies and programs to promote the resilience and self-reliance of our country through a holistic and integrated approach. John, over to you.
Thanks, Jordan, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a really important time to be talking about our resilience. Here we are in the midst of a pandemic. We've got a tsunami of an economic crisis heading towards us, and we really need to think about our resilience and self-reliance. So to set the scene for some of this discussion, I want to talk about either some warnings or lessons from our CV19 experience. And I'm going to talk about three issues. Firstly, preparedness and resilience. What do we mean by that? Secondly, where are we today? Where do we find ourselves in this early stage of the pandemic? And thirdly, what should we think about next? Because it's not only a matter of dealing with the current crisis, it's frankly preparing for the next one. Now, the characteristic or attribute of society to be able to deal with a range of risks and threats, and then in the aftermath to absorb, accommodate or adapt and recover in a timely manner is what the United Nations refers to as resilience. And that certainly resonates with me. But we can't be truly resilient unless we are prepared. So what's preparedness? It's a term that we use in the military a lot. We have to start with a thorough analysis of our risks and vulnerabilities to understand what the problem space is, not just of today, but what's emerging, coming at us down the line. Where you can't prevent something, then you've got to face reality and adapt. We're not too good at doing that. We keep building houses on the edge of cliffs and seafronts. But the really important thing is not just adapting, it's preparing to address the risk when it arrives as best we can. And in a military term, that preparedness is readiness and sustainability. And there are similar things if you think about the capabilities in our society and industry and community to be ready to react, but how long can we sustain that? That's where supply chains become very important. Finally, when the risk eventuates, we react as best we can to meet the situation. Now, I think we would probably most of us agree that we've reacted very well in Australia to the pandemic. But were we adequately prepared for this or any other range of significant issues that can eventuate, and for the economic crisis heading towards us? So where are we today? The coronavirus pandemic's exposed a global lack of resilience as a result of a collective failure to prepare. In Australia, we lack an integrated systems risk analysis of our vulnerabilities. And what we have done in effect is we have left our resilience and therefore, to a degree, our sovereignty and security to a largely foreign-owned market. Now, we're particularly vulnerable to trade disruptions in the global marketplace. An island nation, we're at the end of very long global trade routes. We're heavily reliant on just-in-time supply chains with limited resilience in those chains and a very low tolerance for loss or disruption. So in the early days of the pandemic, provided a graphic example of how quickly some parts of societal cohesion can fracture when supply chains are compromised or just merely simply perceived to be compromised. We didn't have a toilet paper shortage. We had idiot behavior. Now, global trade and diverse chains, supply chains are essential for our economic and social way of being, and that will be the predominant model. However, we're arguing that we need to redesign critical components of our industry base and supply chains under what we're calling a smart sovereignty model. This infers not only a degree of Australian-based manufacturing capability where appropriate and domestic supply chains, but the appropriate R&D facilities, the skilled and experienced workforce. And of course, the IT sector is an absolute vital component of this. But sovereignty also implies, to a degree, either Australian ownership or control over critical capabilities. So think of parts of our critical infrastructure. We're not talking about socialism or nationalisation of whole sectors of the economy, nor are we talking ongoing subordination to the ideology of the free market. Now, a country like Australia with small population relative to a region and an economic base that's strong but not particularly large will only ever have a moderate level of sovereign capabilities. Determining that appropriate level will be a really complex task. Now, in some areas, it's pretty clear we have to have more. We import 90% of our fuels, 90% of our medicines, and we've got significant medicine shortages at the time being. Now, we can see areas that we should have greater national capabilities, but how about the IT sector? What are our import dependencies there? What does it make sense for us to have as capability in the country? And I know Jordan's going to raise those questions during discussion. In our view, this complement to smart sovereignty is the establishment of trusted supply chains. Where we depend and will continue to depend on global imports, we must have diverse, but most importantly, transparent supply chains. We've got to have the ability to see what they are and to be able to verify them. And that's where information technologies such as blockchain are absolutely vital as a method of improving the ability to verify and see what's happening. The next question, of course, is how trusted are our supply chains for IoT? We're dealing in a world nowadays where significant parts of our trading partners are not a trusted partner. There's significant distrust going on. So where to now? Well, resilience and preparedness shouldn't be perceived as an inconvenience. It will cost us more, but it's an inherent essential part of living in the modern world. We should not try to replicate the pre-COVID-19 Australia. We need to capitalise on the positive aspects. We've seen some really beneficial teaming, state, federal, industry unions, but let's learn from the negativity. Let's learn from the fragility and opaque nature of our industrial base and resulting supply chains. We need to ask ourselves how well we are prepared in critical areas, health infrastructure or strategic industries, communications, energy, transport. And in the area of today's discussion, the information and data architecture and systems that are so fundamental to our functioning as society. Should key technologies such as AI, robotics, computing hardware, cryptography, should they be supported and fostered so we have a degree of capability in this country, perhaps with some additional support or protection? But we can't steer our way through this without a strategy, integrated policies and a plan. That's going to be a real challenge for our political system. It's hard to admit that we've got vulnerabilities if the media then says, well, what are you doing about them? But this is not optional. We have a complex world, a deteriorating security environment, and this will give us even more problems unless we change. So we collectively, Australians, need to insist our politicians do something about this, but we have to be a part of that conversation. The expertise represented in this audience needs to be a part of that conversation. Thanks, Jordan. Back to you.
Thank you very much, John. Next, I'd like to introduce Rita Arrigo. Rita is qualified as an engineer, which has underpinned her diverse career, working in business development, marketing and strategy for a variety of the most significant local and multinational technology companies in Australia. Rita has experience as a founder of several different types of businesses and serves as an advisor to both high growth and non-profit ventures. Today, Rita joins us in her capacity as the Industry Digital Strategist for Microsoft Australia. Rita.
Thank you so much. Amazing introduction, Jordan, and such an honour to be here talking about the impact that technology can have on our economy and our lives. And it's something that I'm very passionate about, having had a technology engineering education and worked in and now as a digital transformation professional, really. It's been a very exciting time seeing the kind of transformation that would normally take 2 years happen in 2 months, and us really starting to adopt technology like never before. For example, the amount of remote work that's currently occurring in Australia is highly significant, and it's the kind of thing that, you know, we've been wanting to do for quite a while, but needed that impetus to get there. So in terms of the kind of things that I think is going to make us more human and allow us to use technology in a way that is going to improve both our lives and our economy, I think some of the most important things that we need to consider are things like inclusion and ensuring that our technology is available to everyone. Trust is completely vital in terms of making sure you trust the technology, ensuring the fundamental rights around responsible AI, and sustainability is also a really important part of what is driving a lot of this technology change. It's really fascinating. Imagine, you know, just how sustainability is actually, how we actually are being more sustainable at the moment in the way that we're working remotely, and how the cloud is actually creating a lot more sustainable computing as well. So sustainability is a really important tenet for this kind of transformation. I also wanted to mention that it's really exciting to see the reimagining of big problems in this pandemic era, and how we're finding ways to solve really complex issues using things like AI and data collaboratives and mixed reality. For example, the NHS needed to, in the UK, needed to manufacture a whole lot more ventilators because of the conditions. And they actually looked at using mixed reality to reimagine their manufacturing processes. So it's really exciting to see governments and industry really really doubling down on technology to make an impact on what's going on in the current situation. Jordan, did you want me to keep going?
No, that's okay. If you're ready, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Rita. Before I move on to introduce our next guest, I'd just like to mention to everybody in the audience, first of all, thank you very much for coming along. We really appreciate you making the time. If you do have any questions for the panel, please use the Q&A function you'll find at the bottom of your screen to enter your questions, or perhaps to vote up other people's questions. And if you want to introduce yourselves through the chat channel, by all means, feel free to do that. Now, moving on, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Sally Ann Williams. So Sally brings a wealth of experience and success in leading and advising a diverse range of enterprises. She's a strong advocate for the increased role of women in all aspects of our society, and particularly in STEM careers and venture leadership. Sally is the CEO of Cicada Innovations. Based in Sydney, Cicada is one of the longest running and most successful facilitators in Australia of translation and commercialization of deep tech for global impact. Sally, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jordan, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I think it's a really important one, and it's one that we need to wrestle with and grapple with to really bring the entire nation along about where we're going to go to in the future and how we get there collectively and together. I thought what I'd do is do a couple of things in these brief opening remarks. And firstly, I just want to broaden the understanding of what we mean about ICT. So you can see behind me, I'm actually in my office. We're incredibly resilient. We're open for business. We house between 40 to 60 companies working on deep tech solutions in health, in agriculture, in heavy industries, in all sorts of different diagnostics and therapeutics. And every single one of them has a tech component to it, but they're not exclusively software related. There's hardware, there's machine learnings, we have wet labs, we have electronics rooms and facilities. And what's been really interesting in this season of COVID and sort of, us going through this journey as a country and globally about what that means for the economy and what that means for people's health and outcomes, been really interesting to observe what these companies are doing and their response, and both the impact of COVID on their business and their business in responding to COVID. And so when I sort of preface my remarks and talk about technology and talk about ICT, I think it is a very broad enabling technology. It is something that is inherently fundamentally in computer science and software engineering skills, but it's something that happens in every vertical. And I think when we start to talk about ICT and technology in Australia, we need to have a much more integrated conversation. And we need to do it in the context of the problems that we're trying to solve. And those big problems are really challenges and opportunities for us to bring solutions to market. So I wanted to share a little bit about some of the things that I've observed in this season with our resident companies about resilience and preparedness, and where to, what's next, and recognising that none of us at the outset of this were actually planning for a pandemic or building our businesses with a pandemic in mind. But there's been a lot of things that I've observed as outcomes of the situation that we find ourselves in that I think are a really good thing for us to reflect on as we think about the future. So the first thing I would say is deep tech by its very nature is incredibly resilient. So deep tech companies are founded in science and engineering. They typically take a very long time to bring a product or service to market. So if you think about ResMed, Cochlear, Wi-Fi, they're all 30 to 40 years to bring a product or solution to market. It's a really, really long time frame. It's outside of the bounds of a political life cycle or a policy life cycle or even a venture capital life cycle. These are multiple tranches of funding over the years. They are multiple years of research, bench to lab and failure in clinical trials and in lab trials. But what's been really interesting to notice is those companies that are in here that have a product or service in market have not missed a beat during COVID. They have kept going and they have actually grown. We're about 95% capacity full in here at the moment, and we haven't lost a single business yet. They're all still growing and thriving, which is just phenomenal. And part of that is the hard yards of what they've built has happened in the earlier years. So when they have a product in market, they've actually been able to extend from that or pivot it. So let me give you two quick examples because I think it's important to bring life and flavor and color to some of these things so that you can take it away and really understand what I mean. So Columino, one of our resident companies here, has a sensor technology that they were deploying pre-COVID, were deploying into aged care facilities that works in a privacy preserving way to monitor and detect movement, temperature, falls, health and well-being is probably the broadest way that I can describe it. What they realized when COVID started sort of really taking hold globally and turning out to be this huge challenge for us is that it wasn't going to go away. And the sensor and the technology that they had was an enabling device that could be deployed to help manage health and well-being in a whole raft of different situations. So they deployed the rapid thermo scanner, which is about the size of a GoPro, as a plug and play device that could be used in any office, in any school, in any environment to monitor people's temperature in a privacy preserving way to alert them to their health and well-being and whether they should be, whether they should seek medical advice or not. They've since gone on and deployed that with another provider who does kiosks and registrations, and they've been able to expand their product offering as a solution to market that we need globally. And they've been able to engineer, build that, and do the whole supply chain right here from Sydney CBD. The other one that's really interesting is SpeedX, which is a molecular diagnostics company in here. And they already had several test kits and products in market that they manufacture on site and deploy globally. But in their respiratory test kit, they've been able to release a COVID test in there as well. So now not only are they able to test for whether you have COVID or not, but they're actually able to say influenza A, B, which other respiratory illness that you might have, and be able to diagnose, whether that's going to be an issue to get you the treatment that you need fast. And the really interesting thing about these companies is they haven't needed any additional resources to do this. They've been able to build on the existing capacity they have, and they've actually gone on to grow and employ people. And we've had others raise capital, join the space, and do really well. I think the two other points that I just want to make really quickly on this that I think is really interesting is deep tech companies, if they have a product in market, have a natural ability and resilience to build upon that and to take that technology and build it in other directions, which is kind of a platform play. I think if they're focused on solving really big global problems, those problems have not gone away during COVID. Some industries like travel and others have really suffered extensively because they are an absolutely clear no-go zone. But health and well-being, energy, agriculture, food, all of these things are critical to us both at a national level but also at a global level. And so people that are working in those areas, which are natural strengths for Australia and we have a long history and a capability in, are enabling systems and enabling opportunities for us to build new businesses on and expand businesses on it in that way. So when I think about what the opportunity for us is in Australia, I think we focus on the really big problems at hand that we see both locally and globally. I think we look to our existing strengths and capacity, and we have amazing strengths and capacities in a lot of areas that we would deem as traditional, that there's opportunities to reinvent and to take them in new directions. And then we continue to focus on building the skills. It's been really encouraging to see over the years that government has got on board and invested in long-term skill development through the introduction of the digital technologies curriculum from kindergarten all the way through. Now we haven't seen that flow through yet. These are long-term solutions and they take a long time to bring to market. But when we actually see the flow through of those students coming through, there's going to be a real enabler for us as businesses to leverage off those skills and capabilities at every level to help us bring new solutions and products to market. So I personally feel like this is our moment. It's our moment to embrace deep tech. It's our moment to embrace some of the inherent capabilities that we have in this country and to connect that with the problems and the challenges that society is facing, because what we're facing locally, we're facing globally. And if we can solve it at a local level, that's a product and service that we can sell globally. And that's a real enabler for us for both, future economic benefit, but also well-being in our country as a whole. And I think I'll pause there, Jordan.
Thank you very much, Sally. That was great. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to pose a couple of questions for the panel. Meanwhile, for those of you who are thinking of questions you'd like to ask, please put them into the Q&A. So my first question for the panel is, since this whole pandemic started, a lot of us have observed that many existing digital trends have been rapidly accelerated. Obviously, one of the most obvious is what we're doing right now. But there have been a whole range of different technology trends that have been accelerated with positive and constructive benefits to our community and our society. And some of those are going to be ones with changes that are not going to be reversed. We're not going backwards after this. And to John's earlier point, why should we want to? So I wonder if each of you could just choose perhaps what you think is your favorite example of a technology trend that has been accelerated and is going to stay with us going into the future.
I'll jump in.
Yep.
If you weren't going to name us, I was going to jump in first. So I actually think it's actually not a technology trend, because the technology has been there for a very long time. I would say it's a cultural shift about what is socially acceptable. And I think that is about both online conferencing, working from home, and telehealth. Video conferencing, this ability to be able to kind of remotely connect and have really deep and meaningful engagement, but also diagnose things, that's a service that's been available. That technology is not new. That technology is old. We've had it for a really long time. But our social systems and our infrastructure, we've resisted it, and we've said you can't possibly do these things remotely. It's critical that you meet face to face. And I think we've actually proven that that's no longer the case. Actually, that's kind of like it's one of those little lies. It's one of those myths that we've told ourselves, and we've actually proven you can do the opposite. So I think that's a really great thing. I think it's great that government has offered reimbursements for telehealth, and I think and doctors being able to work and diagnose and treat people remotely. And I think those are things that we want to keep going forward, not at the exclusion of meeting together, but it shouldn't be an either or. It should be a yes and. And I'm really excited to see that break down, because this is how I've worked for the last 13 years.
Very good. Thank you, Sally. Rita, did you want to comment?
Us at Microsoft, you can imagine we've been doing video conferencing for a while, and we've been working with a lot of our customers to say, hey, maybe you could do this too. And it's been a real reawakening now where clients that thought it would take 2 years to implement this, and they wanted to evaluate every piece of technology before they'd go and use it. And now out there providing services, like the whole of Services Australia is working from home and running JobKeeper from home. I just think these technologies are amazing because it's the true leveler. So I used to be on a lot of conference calls where people were from America, or were they from different places, half the people in the room, some were people coming in on a call, but having everyone come in on a call really creates this new level of inclusion. And I've really noticed the inclusion that you get through that. Still haven't figured out how to, be the only girl in the room, but we'll see how we go. But that's definitely a technology I'm hoping is going to stay, because I think everyone wants the ability to be able to work from anywhere at any time.
Excellent. Thank you, Rita. John, would you like to?
I think Sally spots the key one. It's the cultural shift that using existing technologies that is the fundamental one. Because when you look at the problems we're facing in society with exponential growth and consumption, we often don't look to the demand side. We run, how can we do more of something? How we can bring it in? And some of the government policies, for example, on energy, if you start at the demand side, how do you reduce that demand? Well, what we're seeing now with this remote working and connectivity, we're actually having a reduction in demand that will help solve a whole range of other problems. That said, what I'm hoping is that now the technology sector will take this to heart and actually produce integrated technologies, because we're dealing with a lot of stovepipe systems, and some of them don't work very well. I was presenting to a joint standing committee the other day, and I won't say which system it was. It took 25 minutes to get the senators to be able to log on and actually participate in it, about which stage everybody just about gave up. So technology is there that enables it. Now to get the technology working integrated rather than in pieces, I think is the huge opportunity.
Excellent. Well, maybe Rita, I'll come back to you to start with the next question. So one idea of how Australia can and perhaps should develop greater resilience in our supply chains for digital and electronics goods and services.
So having modern supply chains is, something that's really dear to our hearts in terms of being able to really work into that kind of supply chain element. But from both horizontal, vertical, end-to-end engineering. But it is about, looking at new business models and new ways of production to organise our supply chains to be more efficient and attractive. An example of that might be some of the work that we've been doing in the blockchain space, where we're able to be able to use blockchain to more precisely understand the provenance of certain products, etc. So that would allow us to then have much stronger resilience, because we would actually be able to then be able to choose alternative suppliers based on where we're looking at that particular product. So being able to have those local initiatives, particularly in the supply chain space, could make a really big difference.
You're on mute, Jordan.
Not anymore. Oh, he's coming off.
Sorry, there was a clash of unmuters there. Would you like to have a go, John, at responding?
Yeah, okay. I think when you look at resilience of supply chains, the most important part starts with understanding what the supply chain is. So you need to have visibility of it and understand how it flows. An example, in medicines, companies don't tell us where the manufacturing happens or where the ingredients come from because it's intellectual property. How convenient. But so if we can use technology to get visibility on the supply chain, so that's transparency, the next thing is verification. And yeah, as Rita said, blockchain's got a really interesting role to play in here, both in verification of the various steps, but also in quality checking. One example I'm probably going to run into in a supply chain is temperature controlled medicines. Yeah, if we get millions and billions of vaccines, I think you've got to control the temperature. How are we going to distribute this around this country when our current cold temperature supply chain system has got some fundamental problems with it? So again, the technology that allows us to track, control, and even measure temperature is going to be very, very important. And that's an area that hasn't been addressed yet. So I think it's that visibility and understanding of it is absolutely important. And yeah, hopefully blockchain will give us some things towards it.
Sally?
I love this question because this was a lived reality for us in the early stages of COVID unfolding in Australia, where we would have phone calls from various parts of various state governments and people in the federal government and system trying to just understand where capabilities lied, who had what, and what could we potentially produce if there was a shortage. And what that really showed me was we actually we've lost oversight of what we have capability to do in this country. And what we have, not just what we have capability to do, but where we could actually additionally produce things. And so what I mean by that, it's really obvious to go to a company and say, hey, you make respirators, can you make us some? You know, it's less obvious to go to a company that might provide reagents for particular clinical sort of situations and medicines and go, actually, we need that for this respiratory, you know, for this COVID kit that we're building or this test kit that we're building over here. And so we just don't have any high level national visibility of what's actually happening in Australia and where things are at. There was a massive ethanol shortage as everyone pivoted to produce hand sanitizer, and you couldn't get ethanol in the country. And so I think one of the things that we need to actually have a conversation about is what do we have, and do we have a rigorous understanding of that at a high level, at a national level, at a state level? It was really interesting watching. Queensland had this great example of where they very quickly put up a website and said, these are the things we might be looking for. What do you have capacity to do? And it was a matching system. And so they were using very much, it was a very simple process of forms and spreadsheets on the back end to kind of make that matching happen. But could you imagine if we actually had that capacity and that understanding, which we could build off the systems that we have in Australia? You know, we do have various national systems around tax and business registration and all these things that we could get some high level understanding of what's going on in these businesses and maybe make some of those connections so that we can really quickly have those conversations when a crisis like COVID happens. The other thing I think that was really interesting was we actually made assumptions, and the toilet paper interest, I know we're not talking about technology here, but the toilet paper one was really interesting. Oh my gosh, there's going to be a shortage because we don't have that in our country. Well, actually with components as well, that was really interesting. So both with hardware and other things that could be manufactured, there was an assumption that we were going to have to look offshore for things when actually we did have those things in-house in Australia and to look to that. So for me, that was something super interesting to see. And I think we need to develop a much better overview and understanding of that. And I think we need to find ways to connect that ecosystem better, both across businesses, but also business to government. And I think that's the challenge government faces when you're only dealing with large corporates, or your supply chain is from large manufacturers who may be multinationals, who maybe, have significant headquartering overseas. You don't necessarily know what all of these other SMBs are doing. And really, there was a lot of SMBs that were, responding to COVID and who have been able to step up and actually provide what we've needed, both from a PPE perspective, but also from a tech perspective. CoreView, one of Main Sequence Ventures backed companies, was one of the leading providers of telehealth during this time. They've been around for quite some time, but it took something like this for somebody to kind of push them up and say, pay attention, this is an opportunity and these people can deliver. So, you know, for me, I think we need to have a better understanding of the depth of our supply chain, and that smaller, all of those smaller businesses out there who have a robustness, who have a capability and are able and willing to pivot and deliver very, very quickly. And there's a lot of them, and it's a hidden strength that we can tap into.
John, can I just add one quick thing?
Yes, go ahead.
I deal with 4 startups and a bunch of SMEs we're supporting, and in the health resilience part of the projects we're running, we had interesting discussions. Some of these SMEs have done some amazing pivoting and stepping up and producing something and investing their own money. Once they got it underway, they started to find that hospitals or areas that are publicly funded then switched to find the cheapest source of that material as the overseas production line came back on. So we have fantastic technology and innovation. We fundamentally lack a strategic understanding at the federal and state levels of government to support those innovative SMEs, because if they're prepared to pivot and do something, we have a responsibility to prioritize them in the supply chain. That's fundamentally missing at the moment.
Thank you. Well, as long as we're touching on the topic of the government, because it's certainly one of the questions that the audience have. Rita, Sally, do you have anything you'd like to say about the position of the government?
I'm just so impressed on how quickly the government was able to mobilise and start to still deliver amazing services, even though, you know, their whole world had been turned upside down with not being able to go to work. So I think it's been a really exciting time for the government, because they've also really started to appreciate technology so much more than they did in the past. So I see only blue skies with regards to that.
Yeah, look, I think I don't want to get into a slamming government. I just don't think it solves anything. I think we have to look forward and go, where is the opportunity and the pathway forward? I think there's been a lot of very tough learnings, and not just by government, but by business, right? Businesses have been caught short out, having been very short-sighted and been able to look, you know, always be projecting the next 6 months and the next 12 months. And so I think this has been a really rude wake-up call for a lot of people about thinking about long-term resilience in their organization and what they're doing. What I really hope is that we don't waste this opportunity to have the really challenging conversations about how do we get back on track. If we really want to have a country that is founded in science and engineering based solutions in our businesses, that has massively strong commercialization of R&D, that has a really highly capable and competent technology driven, you know, workforce and capabilities, that is decades in the making. And we can't make an investment now and expect it to pay off in 12 months. We have to actually make investments now and recognize that they're going to take 5, 10, 20 years to pay off in some ways. And so I think, you know, if anything, if this is the moment, it's the moment to actually say, let's take a long-term view. We need to do what we need to do now to respond and be in the moment for this crisis. But how are we building up the frameworks, and how are we actually looking at the entire the entire system to build up a robustness that's going to set us up for the future and for the long term. And I think that long-term policy discussion, that long-term investment discussion, that long-term perspective is something that, you know, we haven't had it for a very long time in Australia. We haven't had those really robust conversations. We tend to work to political cycles sometimes. We've got to get back to that. And I think we've got to have it now in the midst of this, because that's what's actually going to build up that resilience for the future. So for me, I think there's glimmers of an appetite for people to actually engage in that. And if we can do that and keep it, you know, we're not going to have these conversations and they're going to be resolved in a day. It's not that simple. It is actually really challenging to bring everybody on the journey, but I think that's where we need to focus.
Well, thank you, Sally. And that leads us well into the next question. So let's lift our eyes to the horizon a bit. If we think about, say, the next decade, I wonder if each of you could name just one digital or electronics technology capability, so not a specific technology, but a capability we would build on technology that you think Australia as a nation, we should build so that we will be internationally competitive, and that can be a sovereign asset. John, would you like to start?
Yeah, I wouldn't pick a technology. I'd pick the sector and then see what you can do there. I mean, there's, as I said, excellent innovation at the tactical level, at the businesses and the emerging areas. What we don't have is that environment around in our business sector that's brought either through regulation or support to allow those various startups or small industries to compete internationally. So rather than picking one, as I said at the start, I congratulate the government on how they've reacted, but I think we fundamentally failed in preparation. And if you're going to take a longer term view, we've got to work out what the roadblocks are. The problem's not with the science and the technology of the development, the tactical level. It's the environment where we don't foster support and enable them. So as people build, they either go out of business because they're having problems getting contracts with parts of government, or they can't compete internationally and they get sold. So quite a few of my friends have been through that process of building companies up. It gets to the stage because of scale, you end up selling it to an international one. So I think it's the issue of the business environment we pick to allow industries to compete, the startups in Australia, and then they'll determine which is the best one to push. I wouldn't pick a particular technology winner.
Sally, would you like to have a go?
Yeah, I'm going to pick one because I think it's an enabler, and I think it's vertical agnostic, so it's industry agnostic, but I would say machine learning. And I'm going to say machine learning versus artificial intelligence. And, you know, for those in the know, you can have a great debate in the chat about this. I'm sure you will, now that I've said it. But I think machine learning and a real understanding of the drive of what that can do to drive opportunities in every single area. It can be both around discovery and understanding in medicine and medtech. It can be around optimization in business processes. It can be around, you know, agronomy and applying that in food and systems. It can be around environmental areas. Now, the thing about it is it's not just about having people who are really competent and really capable. And let me be very, very clear. We do not have enough experts in Australia, and any business leader out there that tells you that they have, you know, 100, 150 AI experts working for them in Australia, I'm sorry, you don't. That's an absolute myth. I had 800 people working with me in the engineering team at Google, and they were not all experts in this space. And so you just don't. So we do need more expertise in this, but one of the areas we need actually more expertise is people with a deep understanding of the opportunity that are in the businesses out there. So when we're talking about machine learning, or we're talking about, you know, AI or something like that, it's not your chatbot on your website. You know, if that's what you do, great, more power to you. But honestly, I'm not going to get excited about that, and that's not going to make a transformational difference in your business. So we actually need business leaders. We need to have more people in policy. I'm a massive believer. I used to talk about this all the time of CS plus X. So computer science plus X, where X is your passion, it's the problem you're trying to solve, or it's any other discipline, right? And when you actually combine these two, it's the intersection of that is where opportunity lies. And we need our people who are trained technically to have some other cross-disciplinary skills and capabilities so that they can actually speak into that space. And we need people that don't have technical skills. They don't need to be technologists. They don't need to be the coders, but they do need to understand the discipline in a depth that they don't currently do now. Because some of the advice and the decision-making that we get at the highest levels of business and government is incomplete. And it's not nuanced. And I think when we speak of disciplinary silos, and you're going to get me on a soapbox right now about STEM and STEAM, I don't care. I'm actually not interested in either one of those things. I'm actually interested in multidisciplinary approaches, because when you look at where the magic happens, it's from multidisciplinary teams. We need deeper technical capabilities. We need more people be technically capable. Don't get me wrong, I've worked for years on changing the national curriculum and worked for years on teacher enablement around computer science development in this country. It is something I am incredibly well invested in, personally and professionally. But when we're talking about decision making, we need people that have more than one capability and skill. And so that's, for me, I think if we had people that really understood the power and the opportunities through machine learning, it could unlock some great stuff for us in Australia, even if they're not the ones to actually deliver on the actual building of the machine learning models.
Thanks, Sally. So another question that's come from our audience relates to the issue that we all have with regards to the unemployment. We know that the pandemic is going to generate a massive problem of unemployment. But another of those trends that we mentioned right back at the beginning of our conversation that is being accelerated is the continuing automation of work and the expected increase in unemployment as automation displaces workers. So if we think about both the short-term unexpected impact of the pandemic and the near-term very expected impact of automating jobs, what do you think we could do in Australia in terms of developing our ICT capabilities to actually accommodate for society this change in the model of employment and returning to something that gives people work? Rita, you would like to go?
Sure, I'd love to. And I also want to thank Sally for your passion for machine learning and deep learning, but also to bring in that multidisciplinary kind of thing that you're talking about, because it's not about a whole lot of technologists sitting in a room coming up with solutions. It's about a whole lot of different people with different skills working together to co-create, new industries. And I'll give you an example, and it may even answer your question around, employment, etc. But I think one of the biggest areas that Australia has a real possibility in really developing, and we've already done a lot of this work around it, is around, high-tech agriculture and sustainability. So, for example, we've got a partner that I've worked really closely with called The Yield, who spent years developing technology that allowed us to have much better yield out of our farming. And now they've moved to California, and they're working on all the wineries that were originally built by Australians when Treasury Wines was owned by Australia. And they're improving the kind of winology techniques and all the different stuff using machine learning and AI as well. So I think it is when you embrace these industries and mix them with technology that you end up getting a lot more of this innovation occurring. Another example is in sustainability. Like, we have incredible amounts of work to do in this space. We've got a lot of species that are endangered. We've got a lot of climates that are endangered, and some of the work that we're doing in working with environmental scientists to empower them to use deep learning to be able to identify species, and then also to find ways to protect the species and different areas is really exciting, and it's really generating jobs. We're doing some work in Kakadu, for example, where they had a shortage of particular magpie geese population, but they figured out using drone technology as well as AI in how to bring those magpie geese back and start to protect the natural environment they had. And that was actually led by a group of Indigenous rangers supported by technologists. So once again, it's bringing that multidisciplinary stuff together and really combining it and getting the technologists out of their back rooms and out working with people. And I think that is the most exciting part of it. I do a lot of hackathons, and I encourage anyone who's in business that's scared of technology, that might want to learn about blockchain or RegTech or AI or IoT or machine learning, to go and do one for a day. Get out of your comfort zone and start to see ways that you can bring that into your organization as well, because it's having that thirst for new technology that's going to make such a big difference as well.
Thank you, Rita. John, do you have any thoughts about how we can address the employment challenges?
Yeah, I'll be a little bit more basic about it. Whilst information technology is actually critical, it's going to make a lot of areas more effective and more cost effective. I think if you start to listen to what Karen Andrews is saying, the industry minister, we've got an economy largely based on raw material export. And that's fine. It's got us to where we are now today. So the issue still comes back to, if you want to look at employment, we've got to look at where value added comes in and how we can do that to process materials more effectively or at a lower cost using technology. But it's that shift in approach of not just fixating on digging stuff out and chucking offshore, to think about how we do value added and how we can do it more intelligently with technology. It's not technology in itself, it's a policy shift on where we see our industrial bases and how we are going to move it. Karen Andrews is talking about those issues, but really a lot of our big industrial level, interest groups are all pushing, dig it out, send it out, import it.
I don't know. I think both Sally and I talked about these multidisciplinary industries where we are adding value, etc. It's It's Rita speaking. I know you're trying to see me on the screen. So I think it's not just about digging stuff out of the ground, and we already have evidence of people, of industry going beyond that and being a lot more, adding value to what they're digging out and producing, etc.
Look, I just want to add to this because we had a panel on this last week. So we ran one, you can check it out on our website, and we were talking about manufacturing 4.0 and what does that mean? And we talked about jobs. And what was really interesting is that every single person on that panel talked about how there's more jobs that actually come from it. And so really what we're not talking about is a loss of jobs, we're talking about retraining and reskilling. So let me give you one practical example of that. So Colin, who is the CEO of SpeedX, was on there talking about how they desperately want to automate some of their production for their test kits here. And they said, well, won't that result in job losses? He said, actually, it's going to result in more employment, because what we want to automate, really, when you're talking about automating, you're automating really basic, low-level tasks that are incredibly repetitive. You're not actually automating the high-level, challenging things. When we're talking about robotics and automation, that is, things that actually are creative and others, they need a human to be driving it. And he's like, if I can automate this, I can hire 4 more people to do this other thing over here, which we want to go into. So then it becomes a conversation, it's not about job losses, it's about how do I get people with the skills that I need? And I think there's an amazing opportunity to have a very difficult conversation, but a conversation we need to have in Australia, is what is our education system and what does higher education look like, and actually look at it inclusively, full spectrum. So not talk about vet on the one hand and not talk about universities on the other, but actually go, what is the purpose of education and what is the purpose of research in that context, and how should that work through? And right now, universities are under a world of pain because their business model has been incredibly challenged. But COVID has just been the icing on the cake. Let's be really clear about that. The fundamental way that universities are funded and have been over the years has been challenged for years. So there are some inherent challenges that need to be changed within the system, but I think there's an opportunity to rethink about this. And one of the things that we need to do as a society, and I firmly believe this, we need to have a value of lifelong education. And this is not about being, a university educated elite that keeps going back to university, but it's actually going, how do I get a worker that is in my factory in a regional Australia the ongoing skills and development that they need, so that we can continue to modernize what we're doing, and that they're going to be capable in doing that. And we have the means and the capabilities to deliver education at scale through those various mechanisms that we do, but we need to make them much more interconnected. And I think we need to flex the system a little bit more and think about what are the deep disciplinary skills that we do need to go to university and wrestle with. And, there's some domain expertise and there's some regulations around it. And so we want those to look like this. But what about all these other things where we're wanting people to have skills and experience that's going to upskill them in their jobs and in their careers for the long term? And I think that's a conversation we really haven't had in a nuanced way in Australia. And we're actually more than a couple of years, we're probably a decade behind the rest of the world. When we went through the GFC, the job losses in America accelerated a conversation about ongoing education and retraining and development in a way that we haven't had to do that. And so right now, I think as we're wrestling about the situation with universities and we're thinking about their funding and we're wrestling with the vet sector, there really is an opportunity to come together and kind of really look at that holistically and go, how do we come up and build a system? If you're building it and designing it from scratch today, I don't think you would build what we have. And that's not to say that what we have is bad, but we need to actually make it fit for purpose moving forward. And there are aspects we want to keep and cherish and invest in, but I think there's other things that we need to wrestle with and go, maybe this could be done in a better way or in a different way. And we could think about some of those things. Now, I don't have the answers for that, but again, that's one of those long-term conversations that education and skills needs to be aligned with a vision for who we want to be as a nation. And they have to go hand in hand in my mind.
Mm.
Thanks very much, Sally. Go ahead, Rita. One last time.
It's really interesting that you mentioned the 90s and what was going on. And I know at Microsoft we have a huge initiative around reskilling. So we plan to reskill 500,000 Australians with a range of different online training for all the stuff that people are looking for, like machine learning, AI, different types of communications, digital communication, being able to use content management systems, how to have visibility of your supply chain, how to build power apps. So there's a whole raft of, and I think you'll see a lot of tech companies investing heavily in that kind of stuff, because it's really important that we reskill, and reskilling is a core tenet of what Microsoft's investing in Australia at the moment.
Thanks. John, do you have one last comment you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, we're talking about the complexity of interconnected and the need to look across the system. I'll say the basic problem: we don't work as a system in the country. Our government is structured in an industrial age model of stovepipes. A minister for this and a minister for that. And they're all motivated to look down their own stream, and the departments do the same thing. And the departments, they then divide into smaller sectors. We're dealing with a complex system problem here. So again, it's that higher level issue that we've got to initiate the change at and try and foster a change in the way we look at these problems in the country. A difficulty with the political system, which in the last decade has been inward focused and stabbing each other in the back. But the opportunity now in this crisis is to say, hey, this is a game changer. We've got to think about how our country works, how the government works, and we've got to get it working differently, because you can't solve this problem in stovepipes.
Excellent. Thank you, John. So well, unfortunately, it's a great conversation, but our time is coming to an end. And I think what we've heard today from everybody is a combination of remarks from different perspectives that all talk about the need for an integrative approach and a long-term perspective, with the very real possibility for short-term achievements. So I think that's an encouraging summation to have of this brief conversation on a very complex topic. I'd like you all to join with me in thanking our conversationalists today. We had Rita Arrigo from Microsoft and John Blackburn from the Australian Institute for Economic Research, and Sally Ann Williams from Cicada Innovations. And I'd just like to remind you all that, before I forget, I also particularly want to thank the events team who are sitting behind the scenes and making this all happen. Without their help, we wouldn't be able to mount these events, and we really appreciate all the work done by the Slattery's team. And I just want to remind you all about the upcoming events. This same conversation topic will continue, but the conversation sessions will continue next month on the 26th of August. And on that occasion, the topic will be tertiary computer science, preparing our future leaders. And as you can see, we touched on that topic today. We also have the 2020 Pearcey Foundation Entrepreneur Awards. They're open now in your state. Please do nominate somebody who you believe deserves the recognition. And our flagship event, the most significant technology oration in the country, the Pearcey Oration, will be held on September the 2nd. Thank you today for your time, for your attendance, and again, thank you all to our conversationalists. Good afternoon.